Okay, well, thank you, everybody. President Schulz and Provost Slinker will make their remarks to Senate. President Schulz has a PowerPoint, and then we'll start the meeting afterwards.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I appreciate the opportunity to come in and visit with you for a few minutes. Sometimes when I come, I just simply do it off notes. Today, I've got a PowerPoint set of slides. I want to just talk about some key things. I've got some graphs in there, so I thought that that would be sort of the best way to move forward. So, and as always, I'd like to welcome all the, oops, where's the keyboard? So what I'd like to do is, some of you who've been to the town halls have seen at least a few of these slides. This is not the whole town hall presentation, but just a couple key things. If we look at our enrollment across the WSU system, our 5-year enrollment, you can see that this last year, once again, we were up. We set another record across the system at 31,607 students. We were up really only at 2 campus locations. In Vancouver, we were up a little bit, and then we also saw some growth out of our global campus system, and we've seen that pretty consistently from year to year. A little bit about the bars underneath, and Greg already made a correction to this slide before I came in here to make it easier for you all to read, so I will promise to change this in the future. But the 2 other bars that are on here, first generation college students, the blue bar, that extends all the way down. So about 32.9% across the system of our students are first generation college students. So that's an important part of WSU. It's been an important part way before I got here. It'll continue to be an important part of what we do moving on. The concern, though, on our first generation students is if we look compared back to 2015, we're seeing a gradual decline in that, just a little bit each year. And as we shape our enrollment, work on enrollment management, this is one of the things that we just need to make sure we understand why we're seeing this decrease from year to year to year. So that's something that we'll continue to work on, and we'll be happy to report back to the Senate as we get some of those details. If we look at our ethnic diversity across our system, though, we see there that we continue to see this increase. And as a reminder, this is mashed together. So some of our campus locations, we've seen a dramatic increase in some of these. Some it's a little flatter, and that's the way it is. One of the things that, if I look at our Pullman campus, just as a reminder, that our enrollment here in Pullman is actually down a little bit from where we were a year ago, and that was done very purposefully. You may remember during the summer of 2018, there was lots of comments about a really large entering class and how we were going to accommodate all those students, both from a residence life point of view, as well as ensuring that those students came in and got the classes they need to do that. Everybody rolled up their sleeves. We reopened Waller during the summer. We accommodated everybody, but that was clear that was really stressing the system for no real reason. And so this year we had a freshman class coming in on the Pullman campus that was just a little bit smaller than the previous years. And again, that way we're just able to accommodate class load, residence life, and those types of things. One of the concerns that has been expressed over time certainly has been about the quality of our incoming class. And so what I want to do is just talk about that for a few minutes. So this last fall, a 3.42 GPA, certainly the highest average GPA for our incoming class, again, across the system, probably in the last decade. So you may remember several years ago, we brought in several classes that were large and let's just say perhaps did not have the academic qualifications to be as successful as we would like. And so what happened then is we had a lot of students that dropped out or did not complete degrees. And I think in classrooms, you all would certainly have seen that. So prior to my arrival, under Dan's tenure as interim president and then as provost, really worked to make sure that we were bringing in a really academically qualified and gifted class, keeping in mind our key values of first-generation college students and ensuring that we have a great ethnic diversity mix of that incoming set of students. So if we look at this entering class, we were up 43 Regent Scholars this last year over where we were in 2018. We had 3 additional National Merit Scholars. And if we look at the students coming into our Honors College, around 300 students coming to Honors College. That was up 20, and you can see a 3.85 average GPA for the students coming into the honors program on the Pullman campus. So one of the reasons I want to and the other interesting thing is if we look and say, well, you had roughly those 300 students went to honors, how many were interested in going into the honors program here in Pullman? And the answer was about double that. And so the question was, of the 300 or so that weren't admitted to the honors class, where'd they go, or did they stay? And it turns out about 80% of them still enrolled in Pullman. So what I want to report is that we continue to see fantastic classes coming in, very academically gifted. And the folks that are entering the honors program, as I interact with those students and their families, what you find is these are students that could go anywhere and generally are admitted all up and down the West Coast. And so I think that's a fantastic thing as we look at building on the road to Drive to 25. We want to make sure that we're doing a great job recruiting those particular students. So lots of good news here. If I look and shift a bit to our research and development expenditures over the last few years, you can see a gradual increase this last year. $370 million is a record for WSU. And I think what's really notable about this is, as you all know, this has been over a time when we have not been hiring faculty colleagues at the rate that we feel we need to grow as a research university. So if we really take this and look at a per faculty member basis, our per faculty member research dollars is better than Purdue and a lot of other top 25 public research universities. What that says, though, is we want to keep growing this, we've got to add colleagues. We've got to have startup funding identified. We've got to keep building and growing in that particular area. But again, my compliments to our faculty who are writing proposals, conducting research, working with our students, our postdocs, writing larger proposals and getting them funded and leading national and international efforts. Congratulations on a job well done here. If I look at private giving to WSU, you can see in 2015, that was the last year of the $1 billion campaign, a 9-year campaign for WSU, highly successful. Then what happens, you sometimes see a little bit of a drop off after that kind of final record-setting year in the campaign. And what I want to point us to is these last 2 years, 2018, 2019, 145 million, essentially the same number in each year. But what you don't see there is we're gradually shifting what our donor base, in terms of the way they give, we're seeing a shift. So for example, in previous years, we had a much higher percentage of those gifts that were planned gifts, people giving it to us when they passed in their estate, and we're very grateful for those commitments to WSU. But what Lisa Calvert and her team, working with our academic deans and so on, are trying to push for additional gifts coming in cash so that we can use them for immediate use. Immediate scholarships and new endowed chair professorships. If we're building any sort of a building, it has to be with cash gifts. So actually in 2019, we had the largest number ever transferred from the foundation to the university, around 110 million in direct cash that is then directly applicable to different types of projects, again, across colleges, departments, and places like that. So where should we be? We started campaign number 3. We started counting campaign number 3 this summer on July 1. We should be eventually somewhere around 250 million a year or better than that in terms of our fundraising. I think that's where we'll get to. Now, obviously, you can't just say, I want to be there, flip a switch and do it. Otherwise, we would have already done it. This just means we have to be up on the road. We have to be out in front of folks. We have to have your great ideas. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, when I talk to our major donors and benefactors about why they're interested in supporting Washington State University, I would say 75 to 80% of the time it's because of a faculty member that they had when they were a student that made a big difference in their career trajectory, their life, their advice, what they majored in, and things like that. So we need those great ideas coming forward because it's going to be important as we work on our fundraising. We also had a really good year in Olympia. And so what's shown here is our operating budget. And many of you remember when I came 4 years ago, we talked about the medical school. We've been given permission by the state of Washington to have a medical school, but we had not had it funded. And so over the last several years, our government relations team, Colleen Kerr, Chris Mulick, our folks in Spokane. Others have been working really hard in Olympia to make sure we actually had the money needed to move our medical school forward. Now, the important thing here is that we eventually have to have enough money to support 80 medical students through first 4 years. That's the break-even point when we look at tuition plus the state support, that then the medical school is actually in the black. So what we got this last year is we now have funding for 60 students to go through years 1 through 4 and 80 students in years 1 and 2. And I think I mentioned before that means in our next biennium, in the 21 biennium, not January of this year, but our next major one, for the first time during my tenure as president, we'll be talking about some other major types of initiatives to be identified that we want to ask the legislature to help us fund. We also had several building projects going on, and right here in Pullman, the Washington Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory, the crane over by the vet school. We built this over 2 biennia. We had to sometimes be creative in how we make sure we get those particular dollars. We have a new building in the Tri-Cities that will have laboratories that are mostly teaching laboratories for geology, physics, biology, chemistry, those types of things. What's cool about the Tri-Cities building is inside it's going to be very similar in many ways to the Spark. Lots of reconfigurable rooms, including labs where you can move things around, and I think a lot less things bolted to the floor, and I think that's our future. At my last time I was here before you, it was about a month ago, and we talked about, at that point, initiating a provost search. Many of you probably saw the announcement of the search committee earlier today. Stacy Pearson, our Vice President for Finance and Administration, has agreed to be one co-chair, and Julie Kamek, professor in the Department of Sociology, has agreed to be the other co-chair. 2 things really came up, or 3, as we were putting this together. One, to a person, those who served on the search committee last time said it's got to be smaller. Having a 24 or 25 member committee was awkward. It didn't work very well. Not everybody on the committee was aware of all the functions what a provost did, so it was really important. People said, you got to make it smaller. When that happens, that means there's always going to be some people who are not happy because some group or some discipline or something like that, people say, well, that's not represented. And I got an email note today from a person who said, you know, you've sent a really strong message about your priorities by who you put on this particular committee. The priorities that I think we did by naming the committee that we did was there's a very strong set of full professors on there that have had established research records at WSU and been here, been highly successful. And that was something that came up at the last time I presented to the Senate, was people said, hey, last time we don't think there was enough research active faculty on there, and we made sure we changed that. So you'll hear comments, and we may have some at the end of this, around the composition of the committee. But I think we got a great group of colleagues, and what we want to do is make sure that when people come onto campus for the interviews, that we have longer time on campus with more interaction with different groups, including asking the provost candidates to come to a couple campus locations during an interview instead of just one. So that stuff's down the road, but I did want to make sure that folks know that we listened to the concerns that were raised on the committee composition and the size, and I really appreciate Stacy and Julie's willingness to lead this effort moving forward. So what's our timeline look like? November 19th, we got a faculty staff listening session with a search firm in Cub 210. Then we expect in March of 2020 to review applications, determine airport interviews, late March to conduct the airport interviews, and then April is when we expect to have candidates on our campus locations for our in-person interviews, then a decision made shortly after that. So one of the other things that has come up during my time with the Senate over the last several years was really around the capital planning process and doing something that was more open, transparent, and that had shared governance as part of our decision-making about what types of things we need to do with the capital projects. These are long timeline projects, and so a lot of the projects that we've been advancing have been on our priority list for a long time, but as those start to clear off now, we have these really great opportunities. So Stacy Pearson and her team really worked together to put together a process, and I want to just go through a couple things. So first, we had to modify it to be more transparent, provide opportunities for input from faculty, staff, and students. Secondly, it should have clearly established scoring and quantitative criteria. It shouldn't be the kind of thing that looks really fuzzy. Why is something advanced or put at this priority on the list and why is something not? That shouldn't be a mystery as to why that's there. People may disagree with the result, but they ought to at least understand how that result was obtained. Capital requests, large and small, has to tie in with a strategic plan. We're working on the strategic plan, but it needs to be the type of thing as faculty and staff and students, people would look and say, yes, that I understand why that's there, and it does tie in with our long-term planning, and not something that I thought on, walking onto campus one morning. We should have a single prioritized list of projects, and this is independent of funding source. So it's not whether it's going to be foundation money, we would have one list. Capital dollars from the state, we'd have another list. If we're going to do some public-private partnerships, is a third list. If we're going to prioritize projects for the WSU as a system, capital projects, large and small, there should be a single list, and then you work on that list, basically going down and saying, well, how can we bring resources to bear to start solving these particular problems? And then finally, we need to consider both new construction, and as you all know, just walking through the buildings and some of the places where you all work, haven't been renovated in 30 or 40 years. And we need to make sure that we're not just building new stuff, that we're actively renovating and updating existing space on a historic campus. So what's the timeline look like? So in October, November, the Vice President for Finance and Administration will release project prioritization criteria, capital needs assessment. That stuff will be going out soon. There'll be a briefing update to the Board of Regents in November. Now, when people see this, they go, okay, well, obviously you've already made your decision if you're going to be talking in November to the regents about it. What we're talking to the regents about is not here's the projects, it's here's the process we're going to use so that the regents are aware of how we're going to get to a particular decision point. Campus leadership submits highest priority needs, major, standalone, and minor. This is really dollars. Major would be above 10 million. Standalone would be a $10 million to $2 million kind of project, and there'll be minor works projects will be less than $2 million. We should have a cumulative list. We already have one of a lot of these that are prioritized and scored. A Vice President for Finance working with a small committee, including representation from the Senate, provides a preliminary prioritization. Folks, this is the key point to be in the room and be involved and engaged is when we're prioritizing what that list is. You can see the rest of it there. Believe it or not, the stuff for the January 21 session has to be done by the end of this summer. That's not our timeline, that's the legislative timeline and when we have to do that. So the way we did this process was Stacy went back and said, August is when we got to have it in, and we just kind of backtrack. So when Stacy comes, she can talk more about this when she comes to the Senate, but I wanted people to have some sense of, again, this is something that was brought up at multiple times to say there's got to be a more transparent, open, and inclusive process for capital projects. So let me finish up here quickly with some fiscal updates, and many of you have seen this slide before or some iteration thereof over the last 3 to 4 years. Just as a reminder, on this one axis we have annual revenue less expenses, like to be above zero there. The last time the university was above zero was FY 2013. Then we went on multiple years, and I'd like to say FY 2017 was record-setting for the university, but not in a good way. We actually overspent that year by $30 million. Now, sometimes, and I'll talk about athletics in a minute, I've heard people say, well, if athletics had their act together, that wouldn't have been an issue there. 13 million of that was athletics, 17 million was overspending in different areas of campus. Rather than go back and assign lots of blame, the key thing is what are you going to do about it? So we rolled up our sleeves. We had a goal then to be at a $20 million deficit target in 2018, 10 million in 2019, balance in 2020. Everybody worked super hard. We held positions open. And then FY 2018, you all might remember, we finished at $8 million over. By this FY 2019, we were up a positive 8 million. Now, when you look at that number, you say, well, how are you going to invest those dollars? Those dollars are out in the colleges and things like that. Those are open positions and things. This is not central resources that we're sitting on. We also this year had to make some decisions. I think I mentioned before, if you haven't heard me say this, I'll say it again, the 1.5% faculty and staff salary increase in January is insufficient. I mean, it's not big enough. It doesn't represent cost of living. It's not going to get us where we need to with salaries. What we had to do this year is take all the dollars that we could find, put them in that salary pool, and that's what we were able to do and not go into a larger deficit to do that. That's really a critical point. There are some things that we're hoping to fund this year that we didn't get to, and this is a list of the major ones. The first is unfunded maintenance of facilities. Okay, this is, we built a bunch of new buildings. And when you build a building, there are lots of folks on campus that can say, Kirk, if it's 100,000 square feet or 50,000 or whatever, this is what's going to cost you to operate it. So this is a kind of thing that as we build new structures, we have to build this into our budget. IT security costs, this is Felicia. This has been around a long time. This was a lawsuit that we had to pay some money. We paid it, but it's sitting in a deficit account. We've got to clear this at some point. Revisions to enrollment arrangements in the College of Arts and Sciences during the initial years of the EBB funds. There was some issues with the way the baseline was set for the College of Arts and Sciences, and so we made a correction to that. Operating costs for our Spokane Research Group. This is iReach. It's a great set of colleagues. We hired away, again, prior to my arrival from the University of Washington. They have been a great set of colleagues. They do tremendous work, but there was a financial commitment made during that recruitment, and we have to continue to pay that off. And other miscellaneous commitments, that's just the small stuff, and it just adds up to around $1 million. So this list 2 years ago was much longer. Stacy and her team have done a great job of slowly moving things off there. But I just wanted you to know that if you say, well, gee, it doesn't seem, Kirk, like your priority's in the right place in terms of how you're spending money, what we're trying to do is continue to work with the Fiscal Advisory Committee. We'll make the best decisions we can, and we'll continue to be open and transparent about what those decisions are. Just a couple more slides, and I'll be done here. I know Pat was here and talked about athletics, and so one of the things I want to continue to make sure everybody is aware of is athletics doesn't get any sort of free pass on anything. They are expected to continue to work towards a budget resolution where they're back in the black themselves. What we show on this graph is the crimson bars are the expenses. The blue bar, the gray bar is income. And if you look at the difference between those two, you can see in FY 2016, $13 million. We've cut that to $7 million, this last $7.1 million in FY 19. Now, we got to keep making progress. It's great that we've almost cut that in half, but we can't take a step back. We can't, take a misstep. So one of the things that we do this year is every Regents meeting, there's an update on the athletics budget. And not a hand-waving one. It's what is the target to date, and have you met the target? And if they're not meeting the target, they're going to have to adjust their expenses and revenue to meet the target. Missing the target is not an option. If you want to see what the athletics budget is, it's on a website. You can go click on it. You can see all the expenses and things mapped out. We're trying to make sure that we do this in a way that everybody sees some accountability in what we're doing. If I could wave a magic wand and we could fix this, Pat Shunn, myself, all the administration here would do that. We way overspent multiple years ago. Pat and his team have done a great job at closing that gap, and that's something that we're going to continue. Now, one of the other things that happens anytime I talk about athletics budgets, people will sometimes say, hey, if we didn't have intercollegiate athletics, just think of where all that money that we're spending could go back into academic programming. So the next slide, and I apologize for the size, because I just captured a graphic here as opposed to constructing it. What this shows is the university's subsidy to intercollegiate athletics. And this shows it over time, and you can't see the numbers really well. That's all part of my plan here. But you can't see the numbers well. If you look back in those first two, that's a 6, and there's an 8 million. And what happened is, basically, during the recession, we cut way back the university's subsidy to intercollegiate athletics. I think that's an appropriate decision. But so what right now, you say, how much money does intercollegiate athletics get from the overall university budget? Over there, it's about $4 million. So that's a lot of money. But on the other hand, there's some programs out there that are subsidized at $25, $30 million. So one of the things that we want to make sure we do is, as we ask Pat and his team to grow that budget, we're not doing it by the university giving them more money. They're doing it by raising money and watching their expenses. So with that, I want to make sure I hit a couple things at Provost Search, where we are with our budget, enrollment, a lot of positive things. I'm excited to start our Provost Search. And at this point, happy to answer any questions anybody has, or if there are things that come up later, which they often seem to do, make sure that Greg has those, and I'm happy to come back anytime or provide written answers to anything we don't get to. So, questions?
I got it. Oh, you got it.
Matt Carroll, School of the Environment. I have 3 questions. I'll ask them very, very quickly, so you can choose to answer them however you choose. 2 of them are questions that occurred to me, and a third one I was very strongly asked by my colleagues to raise with you. My first question is why. My understanding is that the academic side of the House is now in the black on a fiscal year basis, that we've gone from the red to the black. But yet the athletic department is being given another several years to reach the black on an annual operating basis. So the question is why? Secondly, there was an outside expert, Andrew Zimblitz, who came to campus last spring, who's written many books on athletic funding. And what he said was that we're not the best or the worst in terms of losing money on athletics or subsidizing athletics. But he did say that he didn't agree with our athletic director that we would ever reach the black with athletic funding, given the current structural situation that we're in with the Pac-12 and other leagues are involved in. And he suggested that what's really needed is for university presidents to support the antitrust exemption that's been proposed in Congress that would allow presidents, for example, let's say the 12 apostles, you and the other 11 from the Pac-12, to sit down and put caps on athletic spending, coaches' salaries, et cetera, to deal with this whole problem of the arms race that your own financial vice president said could be very dangerous for this institution. That's question 2. Question 3 that my colleagues asked me to raise is to make the point that however necessary the austerity program that we've all been involved in now, really since you took over, and certainly something had to be done, that austerity program has really done damage and created a lot of stress and problems in individual academic units across the campus. And to pretend otherwise is, I think, to be not very intellectually honest. And so we're concerned about burnout. We're concerned about teaching loads going up unreasonably on the part of certain faculty who can cover classes while others can't because of particular other faculty leaving the institution. And so one of the things my colleagues asked me to raise with you and with the provost is, given the fact that this is probably impacting associate professors, tenure-track associate professors, particularly hard. They're being asked to teach more classes. We're probably protecting our assistant professors. Hopefully we are in my unit at least. But once you're an associate professor, you're kind of open to these pressures. Should we be changing our promotion standards from associate to full to take account of the fact that many of our associate professors are having to do a lot more teaching and a lot broader based teaching than they were being asked to do before the austerity program?
Thank you. Let me see what I can do on those without going 20 minutes in each question. So I think in terms of the first, there are actually 3 units that are still deficit spending: athletics, veterinary medicine, the medical school. So you are correct, and everybody is correct on, yes, the majority of academic units now are back in the black. And what we did with each of the other units that is not, is they all had to come up with plans over a multiple year period of time to get themselves back in the black. And what we're trying to do is not cripple anybody. And part of the challenge we had with athletics, frankly, is the amount of overspending as % of their budget was huge. And I don't know that any other unit had that big of a percentage of their budget that they had to try and recover from. So that's the reasoning there, and those are the 3 units that are on what we call recovery plans. And so it's going to be important, again, for all of those units to meet those particular goals as we move forward. The third question, I'll let Brian talk about promotion standards, but hey, I appreciate the fact that it has been really crappy in terms of money, investment in new faculty, investment in travel, all the stuff that people need to be successful over the last couple of years. I've said consistently a couple things. One, we know the spending patterns that got us there, so we got to be really careful we don't go back there. And the second thing is now, hopefully, we're in a position that as we build up dollars moving ahead, that we have a combined idea of where to put those, where to invest those back into the campus community, and to build our faculty numbers and some of those things back up. For example, one of the things we're working on is ensuring that the Vice President for Research has some startup dollars available to help with faculty hiring. That fund will not be as big as everybody would like initially, but a lot of people have been here a long time, so it used to be the Vice Provost for Research could come and you wouldn't get everything, but at least you had a partner. So we're starting to try and restore some of those things that have been cut a long time ago that will have some impact. So I think you should expect the administration to continue to be transparent with where we are, but starting to go back and make sure that we're doing some of these necessary investments to assist our colleagues. What was the second question?
The arms race in the Pac-12 and other athletic programs across the country.
Yeah, I just don't believe it's realistic to go to, I mean, hell, Congress can't do anything anyway. I mean, the idea of, and I'm not trying to make a Democrat or Republican political statement, it's just there doesn't seem to be a lot of a lot of things coming out of there. The idea that they're going to go and they're going to put some sort of an exemption on us to be able to do that, I think it's just unrealistic. And with the legislation that came out of California around likeness of athletes and some of that, and the NCAA coming out yesterday or whatever with their statements on this, I think that door is not just shut. I think it's nailed shut now. So, what is enough? What are the types of things? To me, if we're going to build athletics facilities of any type, it must be funded by private dollars, period. So there's things like that if we can't raise the money to do it, then we're not going to do it. And I think there's some things like that we can put in place and not say, well, we got half the money. I'm sure it'll all come in and we really got to have it, which is what got us in part of the problem that we had before. So there's some things like that we put in place to help, Matthew, prevent those kind of things and us putting ourselves back in this really tough position. But with our donor base, with the number of Cougs that are out there across the state and the wealth in the state, the idea that we can't raise on an annual basis $15 to $16 million, we're almost at 10 now, to support our athletics program, I also believe that is not an unrealistic expectation at all.
So,
awesome. So this is Doug Call from CVM. I missed the introduction about the Provost Committee, and I'm interested in the rationale for the committee composition. Nearly 50% of the committee is administrative, 2 come from Spokane, but it is my understanding that Spokane does not report to the Provost, and no one from several colleges, including CVM, but 3 from Cass, 2 from Murrow. What was the rationale?
So the way we, that's a great question. So the way we tried to put together the search committee was we identified the co-chairs. The co-chairs then meet with members of my staff and others and start filling in gaps and asking who we think should be there. We try and balance it out to ensure that there's at least a representative from each of our campuses. We also tried to make sure that we had more faculty that had long-term research careers at WSU. And there's no way to do a 14-member committee and ensure that we have somebody from every academic unit there. And I know people are going to look and say, well, you didn't respect engineering, you didn't respect CVM, these different things, and you're sending a message that way. We have to trust our colleagues that serve on these committees. Remember, it's a screening committee. They're not a hiring committee. Their job is to screen candidates and bring outstanding people to campus for all of us to look at and interview. I think people got to remember that when we bring people into interview, that's going to be the key time to make sure that everybody has their opportunity to see and interact with those candidates more so than we did this last time.
Yeah, I think I have the mic. Sorry. Yeah, Vaughn Walden from VCEA. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around these numbers. So the athletic department is down, 7 or 8 million a year. So the idea, and the regents have approved that they can deficit spend for another few years, I think until 2023. And at that point, I guess I have a problem with understanding that they're going to be in the black at that time, because actually they'll have a $100 million deficit. And so this is a decade-long, it appears to me, process of getting out. So my question is that yes, their plan is to, as far as I can tell, not curb their expenditures, but because those are still on the rise from your graph here, right, but to fundraise more. So this is kind of a two-part question. If they start fundraising and they're able to get $10 million or more, that will put them in the black per year, correct, right? And they still have tens of millions, if not $100 million deficit to climb out of. That means that they must continue, they must have $10 million additional fundraising every year in order to meet their expenditures every year. That does not handle getting them out of their deficit of $100 million. So that's the first part. The second part is, if there's such an emphasis on fundraising by the athletic department, that will come at the expense of academic programs that are, in fact, trying to fundraise as well. And in fact, Pat Chun, during the 2 weeks ago, said, if someone comes and wants to donate to, the Murrow School, we'll send them to them. So it was almost like we're in charge of the fundraising. I mean, the implication to me was, and I'm putting words in Pat's mouth, but the implications were that we're going to handle the fundraising here and we'll give you leftovers. So,
yep.
Yeah.
So let me try and answer a couple of those things. One of the challenges we've had with athletics fundraising is it's not been very good. Not that it's been too good. So let's look at those numbers. 145 million raised last year. Less than 15 was athletics. The rest was all academic fundraising. So the idea somehow that athletics is getting the cream of the crop and the big gifts and academics is not getting that, that's just simply not supported by the data that's there. We were really pleased athletics got a $2 million commitment, cash commitment, to help fundraise for the indoor practice facility this year. That's fantastic. Largest cash gift in our history to athletics. One time.
Not year over year.
Correct. And that's why we don't include that in that year over year stuff. Now, that accumulated deficit, each year athletics has to meet a $10 million commitment to repay the bonds. So some of that 100 million is actually dollars that are for the bonds. So the reason that they're in the issue they are is because they built those facilities and they got to meet those bond payments. So when they do get back in the black immediately, we're starting to pay off the deficit just because of them doing that 10 million per year that's included in that. So one of the things I'm going to put together is, I think what I want to show is all the debt, when it should be paid off, because most of it's capital, not operating, and that way it's not 100 years out before we would ever pay that back. So maybe one more. Yes.
Yeah. I'm Pamela Toma, and I'm the at-large CAS representative, and a group of chairs and directors in CAS have asked me to ask a couple of questions and make one request having to do with the provost search. The questions are: what information will be provided to the candidate about the organizational structure of the university, and what change is and is not possible? The second question is: what will you do to empower the provost to be successful in the multi-campus system? And the request is We believe the provost candidates should have an opportunity to meet with faculty leadership, specifically representative groups of department chairs and directors, and request this be made part of the campus visit portion of the search process.
So I'll do the third one first. Happy to do that. That's going to be important that we find ways to do that. So I'll tell you yes right now. We'll make that happen. What were the other two? Sorry, quickly. I don't need the whole thing again. Just
What information will be
Yeah, yeah.
provided to the candidate,
Yep.
and what will you, as president, do to empower the provost to be successful in the
Yeah, so we got a couple things that we're doing that. One is everybody in here will see all the information we provide to the candidates. That's public information. We put that all together. We send that out. And, you know, it's a 20-page document that lists all the great stuff about us, as well as typically has challenges and opportunities so that candidates know coming in what those types of things are. So we'll provide, we always do as much information as we can about not just the positives, but also challenges that we're going to expect the person to deal with. So I think I asked Greg, and I've worked with our deans and others to ask for what are some things that work really well currently within the system, and there are some great things. What are some pain points that work within the system? And we're trying to identify then and bring a whole group of those things together so that there are some things that work incredibly well on the academic side within our system. Doesn't make any difference. Campus, that works really well. There are also some things, as people can point out, that don't work very well. We want to identify some of those characteristics and things like that and work on doing some problem solving in that way before a new provost gets here. The second thing I'll say is that I'm putting together a small subcommittee, a small committee that's going to work on what is the system level roles of a chancellor? What are the system level roles of a dean? What are the system level roles of a vice president? And do it at least generically at first to find out. There'll be probably 85% of it. Everybody goes, yeah, you're exactly right. And we want to work, including with Brian in his role as provost, on solving that 15% again before the provost gets here. It is unfair for us to expect somebody coming in from the outside to immediately be able to come in, snap their fingers, and understand a system that is complex and it's got great things that work really well. It's got other things that are bizarre that nobody would design it that way. So I think we want to spend part of the rest of this academic year trying to work together with you all and others to solve those things and put us in a really good place when a new provost comes in. So I've probably blown your schedule way out of proportion. I apologize. So I'll need to come back when you have a heavy agenda. Yes.
I'm loud. Yeah. Okay. I was a little concerned about your. Thank you. I was a little concerned in an answer that you gave earlier in regards to bringing up the NCAA change and the legislation out of California, in that I believe I heard you say that the arms race is a closed door, whereas I far see it being a second door has opened far wider than the first one in the fact of recruiting expenses to get the athletes that can possibly earn endorsements. Secondly, Title IX implications that will come up from that. So are we dismissing this as a possible expense coming from athletics, or are we considering this as possible expenses coming to the athletic department?
So great question. My comment was really about going to Congress and getting that legislation put in place as a way to solve the arms race. I don't think that's going to happen. Now, the stuff with the NCAA, we have a conference call tomorrow with the presidents. I mean, I'm getting my information on this from USA Today. And the reason I mention that, nothing against USA Today, it's just that all this stuff is kind of coming out, and there's speculation that this is going to end intercollegiate athletics as we know it. Other people are saying, well, you know, it's going to all work out. It's going to be great for everybody. You know, the answer is somewhere in the middle, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because I'm a little unsure right now. There's not a lot of specifics out there. There's a lot of big generalities, and we're keeping the sports media people really busy. So. Okay. Thank you. And I'll turn the microphone over to Brian. And I appreciate, as always, the opportunity of the questions. If there's other things I didn't get to or you didn't feel I answered satisfactorily, make sure you let your Faculty Senate leadership know, and I'll make sure you get answers back to you. So thank you.
So I won't forget your question, Matt. So a funny thing happened on the way to retirement, and I still intend to do that. I've been here a long time, and when Kirk asked me to step into this role, it took me a little bit of time to think about it, but this place means a lot to me, so I decided to do it. And it's only for 9 months, now 8, and so I have to be realistic about what I can try to accomplish over that 9 months. And some of that, Kirk's already alluded to, is what are the key things that I think I can do to set up for a new provost. And the systemness issue is one of those priorities for me. And it is for Kirk. And the small working group that's getting set up will continue on work that Craig Parks had already been tasked to do, to examine institutions that we aspire to be like that also have multi-campus systems. So he's got a great database to springboard from. We've been surveying deans and chairs for pinch points, for what works well and why does it work well. Is it working well in a context where there's still problems, but we figured out a way to work around the problem, and shouldn't we just fix the fundamental problem? There are 43, I didn't know this, there are 43 institutions in the top 25. And that's not creative math, that's, you get to be in the top 25 for the MUP thing if you're top 25 on one of them. So of that those 43 institutions in that top 25 group, there's about 24 that have multi-campus systems. So Craig has a lot of data, and he's talked to a lot of people there. So that will feed into the process. And this small working group can then do its own thing, but build on a base of the work Craig's done. And the deans, we just had a dean's workshop today. This is one of the things we talked about, how to make progress on this. That's probably the single biggest thing we can do, or that I can try to do in my time here to set up for a new provost is, let's get clear about the roles and responsibilities. And it's not necessarily that let's get to where we all agree on the roles and responsibilities. Let's be clear about them. Let's get to the best agreement we can, but then let's make sure we understand what they are, they're communicated, and any good dean, chair, whatever, can manage better if they understand the system they're managing in, and they can lead better in the system they're leading in. So part of it's to improve it, and part of it is to be very clear about what those roles and responsibilities are. So that's a major goal for me. In addition, there's stuff Mitzi had started working on that Kirk had asked her to do, that she had wanted to do, working on enrollment management. How do we get good students here? How do we get them here with better net tuition? Continuing to work on budget models. So Don Holbrook, who's longtime AFO in the provost office, Dan brought him over when Dan became provost. He used to work for Dan and Connors. Don is going to spend about 2/3 of his time going forward. Some of you may have seen that announcement. Working more with Stacy Pearson as the VP for Finance and Administration to put before us a series of budget models and scenario plan them so we can actually see if we choose this, this is what happens. If we choose that, this is what happens. And try to get into a position where we have more clarity in budget models and choose something that we can align better with strategy. And that gets back to the system issue too. Some of the budget issues are system budget issues, and that's where clarity in how we do the system helps, is because if we're clear on the system, we can plan better across the system to advantage the whole university, and we can budget better across the whole system in relation to those plans. So that's another major aspect of the systemness issue, but is budget, both for Pullman, but also system-wide. how do we conceive of budgets that link better to strategy as we try to develop strategy? Can I do that by the end of June? I don't know. We can make a lot of progress on that by the end of June. The systemness thing, I think we can have pretty good idea by the end of June. And of course, there's other things that enrollment management, how we work with student affairs in the provost office, and a continuum of the student experience from recruiting them to getting them here to supporting them while they're here and allowing them to succeed and graduate in a reasonable time frame. With Mary Jo out right now, that's slowed down a little bit, but that's still something on the radar, my radar, for the trying to get picked back up and at least start making some progress on in the next few months. So those are the major things. And then every day I discover there's something else I need to do. But those are the big things that I've identified to work on. And Kirk and I have talked about those being the priorities for my time. And all of them, whether completed or not, should get us to a better place where a new provost can come in from a higher launching point for their success. So to Matt's question, I don't have an answer right now, but I'll take that back to the team. One of the reasons I agreed to be provost on an interim basis is there's a fantastic team of vice provosts there. And so Craig Parks, long time there, Mary Wack, and then poor Laura Griner Hill. She now has to work for me instead of Mitzi. Mitzi hired her, but she never worked a day for Mitzi. And her first day on the job was my second day on the job. But she's fantastic. And this is going to be her area, is faculty affairs and tenure.
My reason for raising that question was not necessarily that should be the answer.
Right.
But the point is there's a big issue, there's a lot of stress, and there's people that are not getting where they would like to get because they're taking one for the team.
Yeah. And so it's a fair point, and it's something I think we need to look at, and starting by probably gathering some data on where are these pinch points, and then if it looks like there's something there, do we want to consider how changing criteria? Or my initial answer is we'll be loath to change criteria, but we have to be respectful of people's circumstances as well. But we'll look at it and examine that issue, and I'll ask Laura to frame an approach to that. So I don't have a whole lot else to say. I just wanted to make sure you understood what my big priorities were, and that you also understood I intend to be interim, and that doesn't mean I'm a placeholder. I work hard, known a lot of you a long time, and I'll get us as far as we can in those few months with a goal to really have a good handle on the systemness issue and make progress on enrollment management and budgeting. And as we develop out the strategic plan, how that budgeting connects to planning. And as we think about systemness, how we can get clearer on our system so that we can more effectively plan and budget across the system as a whole, not in silos. So I'm happy to take any questions. How's basketball going to do this year?
It's getting okay.
Okay, good. I'm hoping so.
Okay, well, let's thank the president and provost. All right, let's call the meeting to order. Are there any, let's see, we have approval of the minutes from October 17th. Are there any changes or errors in the minutes? All right, they are approved. Announcements, there major change bulletin number 4, the discussion of assignment due dates and end of term dates, Exhibit C. And then pretty much the other, when Senate leadership met with the president and the provost, the president discussed all of those. Primarily, one of the things that we asked the most about was Executive Policy 29, which is the governance document that covers a multi-campus system, and that is the document that, and you can just search EP29 WSU, and you'll come right to it. And that is the document that defines these roles in administration of chancellors, vice presidents, and whatnot. And it was updated in 2015, and it needs additional updates. So that would be the document that hopefully this small committee can construct such that the roles and responsibilities and oversight is clear. I also wanted to point out that in attempt to be completely transparent, we had an update to Executive Policy 15 that is on the website. And this is the policy that prohibits discrimination, sexual harassment, and sexual misconduct. And that is a result of one of the all 5 working groups, that document. And we have asked the Dean of Students and I believe somebody from, I can't remember the name of the office, to represent or to come and talk to you on the next November 14th meeting, because in that document there are clear requirements for faculty in reporting. And we need to make sure that those are well understood for us to be compliant with Title IX, to make sure those are well understood, and somehow to get through some form of broad faculty training on Title IX requirements, especially when it comes to reporting. So those are my comments, and we can get going from there. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? No. Okay, agenda items, action items. Recommendation from the Academic Affairs Committee to approve the undergraduate major change bulletin number 3, exhibits F and F1, and Casey is here. All in favor, please say, and I would ask that the remote senators unmute their mics. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please say no. Oh, sorry. Okay, passes. Action item number 2, recommendation from the Academic Affairs Committee to approve the new Rule 140 transcripts, Exhibit G. Casey is here to discuss. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please say no. And we are on to discussion items. Recommendation from the Academic Affairs to approve the undergraduate major change bulletin number 4, Exhibit H. Any questions for Casey? Recommendation from the Academic Affairs Committee to approve a new Rule 142, Students' Rights Regarding Educational Records, Exhibit I. Questions for Casey? No? Recommendation from the Graduate Studies Committee to approve the Graduate Major Change Bulletin number 2, Exhibit J. Alex and Umesh are here.
Yes, I'm here, Umesh.
Yes, you are here. Thank you, Umesh. No questions? Okay. Recommendation from the Professional Health Sciences Committee to approve the proposal to establish a certificate in medical ethics, Exhibit K and K1. John is not here, but Becky is to answer any questions. No? Constituent concerns. No constituent concerns. Okay. That ends our meeting. We are adjourned.